Rodriguez, editor-in-chief here at Backstage. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the first ever Backstage Fest, presenting 14 virtual events with over 45 guest speakers. Audiences are invited to take a look inside at the acting and creative talent that goes into making a small screen series a hit. Whether you're interested in being in front of the camera, writing, directing, producing your own material, or working behind the scenes, Backstage Fest has something for you. So head to backstage.com/magazine for the full schedule. And today I'm super excited. Thank you so much for joining us for a Q&A with Oscar-winning director Barry Jenkins, known best for his titles Moonlight, If Beale Street Could Talk, and now most recently The Underground Railroad. Barry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So obviously you've been working on Underground Railroad now since 2016, and a lot has happened since then, to say the least. So now that it's out in the world, I would love to hear a little bit about what you find yourself sort of thinking about most now that it's all kind of sort of said and done and completed.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how, before the show came out, there were all these conversations about the content of the show, slave narratives and things like that. But that was before anybody had seen the show. And so I was curious to see how that conversation would evolve, because my point of view was always that, it's about the intent of the creator. And that I think that dictates how the subject matter is presented and hopefully how it's received. So it's been really cool now that the show is in the world, has entered the world, to see the conversation shift around what the thing actually is, more so than what it represents.
So this is your second go at adapting a novel. Obviously, the first one was If Beale Street Could Talk, and this is based on Colson Whitehead's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. So what were you able to take from that first sort of go at an adaptation, and what were you able to sort of bring into this second round?
Yeah, it was cool. Beale Street was something that was written just by me because it's a feature film, whereas this involved a group of writers, so it was done less in isolation. That was the first difference. But the other difference was, Mr. Baldwin wasn't here, so I couldn't bounce things off of him. And I think because of that, I felt like I had to have this extreme fidelity to the source material. I almost didn't allow myself to take the adaptation to that next level where the thing you're creating begins to manifest its own creations. Whereas with this one, because Colson is with us, two-time Pulitzer Prize winning author Colson Whitehead, I was able to, whenever I thought either myself or someone in the writer's room had pitched an idea that would veer outside or beyond the edges of the text, it was great. I could call him, ask his permission, I guess you would say. And even though he wasn't involved in the process, he was always very kind about, answering the call, hearing me out, and then being like, yeah, go with God. And so I think in that way, that was a much more rigid adaptation. And I think this one is a much more elastic adaptation.
It sounds like you were really able to kind of run with whatever ideas that you had, so long as you kind of had the blessing, if you will, of the sort of original creator.
Yeah, it was like some of the bigger swings, we got the blessings from Colson. For example, the character Grace, aka Fanny Briggs, doesn't exist in the book, and that was a pretty big departure from the book. So I felt it was important to at least let Colson know that we were doing this, because I didn't want to violate the truth of anything he had written. And then the episode of The Great Spirit also is a bit of a departure from the book, not a departure or more an extension. And again, I wanted to make sure we weren't violating the aesthetic contract of the book.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about your sort of your collaboration process. You've said that you've likened your approach, especially on set, directing, to sort of being like a football coach, where you emulate the coaches who sort of shepherded you through your time as an athlete as well. But you talked about checking ego and sort of empowering your team to execute the plan that you guys all kind of talked about, inspiring trust. And obviously something like, Underground Railroad requires, I think, an extra a set or amount of all of those sort of traits. So for you, what did that process look like in practice for this project?
I think in practice, what it looked like was this very humbling reminder. When you do something at this scale, it's very clear that the director isn't in control of everything. And this idea of an auteur, when it comes to something this big, this many pages in this many days, there's no way one person can control or dictate what is happening. And so what I tried to do instead was try to empower people to be very giving and to be very open about what it was their instinct was telling them. And then almost sort of, it's almost like you mentioned this analogy of being a coach. It's almost like not having a playbook and starting off the game and people are just running around. And then you see this person runs best this way, this person runs best that way. And then allowing yourself to find whatever the through line is between the thing that you want, the thing that you see, and the thing that everyone's capable of. And I think in that way, it was really great to see the actors begin to make choices that weren't defined by either the book or the script. They were defined by the character and the space. And so this idea of the freedom or the elasticity in the process, it really began on set. I think once we were there making the show, so many of these really beautiful things started to present themselves. And then we started to rewrite the scripts, to make sure that we were servicing those things.
Amazing. I mean, as a director, it seems like you approached this story in particular. I mean, all of your stories from the interviews and things that I've read, but this one in particular with such grace and such awareness. I know you had a therapist on set, you had a counselor on set. You allowed actors to take the space where they were necessary, when it was necessary. I read an anecdote about Benjamin Walker. He plays that sort of maniacal, very, very dark character, that plantation owner, Terrence Randall, wanting to sort of call his children to tuck them in for bedtime. And you guys were on a tight schedule, but you gave him the space to do that. You said, let him call his kids so that he can reaffirm that he is not this person he's about to sort of dive headlong into for an extended period of time. You, as the director, you hold that sort of push and pull power. So how do you sort of manage walking that fine line between harnessing a very, very heightened emotional state for your cast and crew that can, sometimes make magic on screen, but also understanding, where to take a step back and where to, fine tune that sort of that harness, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's a case by case thing, but I think so long as the actors are clear, I think you have to be constantly reaffirming to people that you do have their well-being. That's important to the process. I just didn't want anybody to be destroyed by creating these images, because the people that we cast, speaking particularly of the actors, I knew that they would be very committed. And once you call action, sometimes it's hard to really understand, okay, I am me and this person is she or he, and where is the line? You get into like take 15 or 20. We never did that many takes. We didn't have time, but you do that because you're trying to reduce the line between the actor and the character. And I just felt like, especially on this film with this process, especially because we were in the spaces, we weren't on sound stages, we were in the spaces where so many of these things happened. I knew that there would be moments where, even for me intellectually, you look to the left and you forget that you're standing on a set. You forget that you're creating a work of art. And so I thought it was important for the actors to always be reminded that I understood that what they were doing was incredibly difficult, that what we are doing is incredibly seductive, and that it's very easy to slip past that line. And if you get too far beyond it, it can be difficult to come back. But it wasn't like I was running around giving everybody back rubs. I mean, there's the scene where Ridgway pulls Cora out of the water, and we did that scene the first take, and I took my headset off and I was just yelling across the set at Joel. It was pretty late in production at that point. I was like, she is not your friend. I know you guys kiki on the weekends, but she is not your friend.
Right.
And I grabbed a bunch of dirt from the ground and I just threw it at the ground. And I was like, this. And then we did the next take, and he was able to do it. So it wasn't that I was always trying to give everybody pink fuzzy slippers. I was also because the moment called for something maniacal. Yeah. And again, we just had to be very professional about knowing where the line was and when it was appropriate to get close to it, and when it was necessary to get close to it.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Joel Egerton there. Excuse me. You've said that actors sort of choose you in the process of casting, but you know, we all love consent. So, what makes you want to say yes when an actor does approach you, and you know, or you know, you sort of feel the pull towards an actor? What does that look like? What is that casting process? How do you develop that for yourself?
It depends. You know, with Tuso had a very rigorous taping and then callback process. With someone like you know, like Calvin Leon Smith, who plays Jasper, it was just a tape. And then with Joel, it was just the same way when Nicholas Bertel, the composer, and I began working together. You know, we've said in the press that I never heard anything Nick had composed. I just liked him as a dude. I think with Joel, you know, he's a great actor. You know, his resume speaks for itself. And so we never really auditioned Ridgeway. We didn't work on the accent or anything. You know, we kind of just hung out and vibed. And I felt like, yeah, this guy, he understands the character. He kind of understands where his role in the process of making this will be, by which I mean, oh, and you're gonna be acting with a 10-year-old scene partner for quite a bit of this. You know, I know you direct, you know, and I think he understood that he was going to have to help me with that. And so it depends. You know, I just know that sometimes I just get this feeling the same way with Nick, and I go, oh, I don't know what I can do with this person, but I know we can do something together. And sometimes that's enough for me to cast a person.
Yeah. Amazing. And I want to talk a little bit about Tuso. I mean, she's a force. She's incredible to watch. She's incredible to witness. You know, she's the first time you guys have worked together. This is sort of like her big project. What do you want actors to sort of know upfront about the ways that you work? And then what elements do you want for them to sort of discover on their own, particularly, you know, in the case of Tuso?
I mean, it depends on the project and the role. You know, with this project, I knew that, especially in the early goings, the main character was going to be unlikable. You know, she's very bitter, she's very angry, and she doesn't have full possession of herself and doesn't have full possession of her body. So she's not going to speak as she expresses herself. She's going to do a lot of that expressing with her posture and with her eyes. And so I was looking for that, and Tuso certainly had it. I was also looking for someone who was strong. 160 days is a lot of days. And this character is doing a lot of really aggressive things over the course of those 116 days. And so with her in particular, I wanted someone who I knew would be tough, you know, because I think there's different ways of working where we're all in the purple and we're trying to, you know, move the jewels and the stones around and find the energy. And then there's other ways of working where you just got to get in and chop wood. The other thing with this one was I knew I wanted visually to have these moments in time that instead of cutting to a new shot, I can create a new shot. And so that would require, because sometimes people get into this muscle where, okay, I'm on for 20 seconds and then cut. And I'm like, no. You're on for 500 seconds and then maybe cut. And that was a quality that I was looking for as well. The biggest thing with me is, and Tuso said this in the press, I'm not going to direct the first take, you know, because I want the actor to take possession of the character. You know, Tuso calls it an offering. Make me an offering. And then I think I will do a reasonably good job of understanding where you are, where in my head, where the character should be. And instead of bringing you all the way to me, let's figure out, well, what's the best thing we can do today? And usually the creation you were talking about, difference between this adaptation and Beale Street, on this one, because there was so much material to cover, there was just much more room to have those offerings beget creations.
Did you find that you were able to sort of use that same approach or a similar approach to Moonlight as well? You know, or how did that sort of,
oh my God,
first one
Moonlight was madness, man. It was just there was no time and no money, and so you everything had to be instinct. Everything had to be gut based. Yeah, I think this process and Moonlight are most similar of any of the things that I've done, which is crazy because budget-wise, they're completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And yet the limitations of Moonlight created this really, really beautiful creative silo that we were able to work in. And I think as we got into the process of making this, that same kind of creative silo presented itself, because for all the resources we had, the margins were still very, very, very tight.
Amazing. Um, I want to talk a little bit about your team. I mean, you've mentioned them in passing, but you've had the awesome luxury of sort of like being able to work with your friends and being able to sort of like carry them. You know, not you carry them, but like work with them
They,
along
they
this
carry
journey.
me. They
Right?
carry me. They carry me.
That's why I corrected myself. I was like, that's not that's not the way that it would be seen. But you know, you met James Laxton while you guys were both studying in film school. You know, you worked with Nicholas Bertel, you know, over 3 projects. Like I said, you have it's like a luxury of sort of building this really wonderful team of people who you inherently trust. But what do you look for in collaborators? Like, what is your sort of number one thing with someone who you potentially are going on this journey with?
I mean, it's a vibe for one. It's like these things are so hard, and it's not worth it to have a bad time while doing them. You know, so somebody can be extremely talented, you know, between action and cut, but miserable to be around. You know, every other moment upset, and it's just not worth it. Not that I get along swimmingly with all my friends all the damn time. To be honest, what the really benefit of it is, you know, I can aggravate James, and James can aggravate me, which allows us access to our full range of emotions. But we then know 5 minutes later it's going to be all good. Working with strangers, that might not be the case. I think the biggest thing, though, is to go back to the actors and the performances. You know, again, the director is one person on a crew of sometimes hundreds. And so the actor is going to spend much more time with everyone else than they do with me. So knowing that the cinematographer, my homeboy, who I was roommates with 20 years ago, when he's over there with Tuso because he has to get in there and fix this or fix that, I know she's in good hands. You know, when the footage comes into the edit, you know, and Joy is sitting there with all these takes, not every take is going to be dope. I know that Joy is going to find a way. If this is the one take that has the great performance, cool. Barry doesn't have to tell me. I'm going to restructure the scene to feature this actor's best assets. I think knowing that and not having to go to each one of those places and look over this person's shoulder or make sure this person is representing me in the way that I want to be represented. It's second nature. You know, these are my people. We share the same vibe, the same aesthetic. And so when no matter who I'm hiring, you know, our first AD on this show, someone named Liz Ton. I mean, she was amazing, amazing. And on a film like this, or a show like this, excuse me, on a show like this,
It's
so
so
many,
cinematic.
you know, with so many background actors, it was really important that the first AD and the second, and all those folks, that they move with the same vibe, the same care, the same warmth, you know, that I felt like, you know, I bring to the process as well.
Mm, amazing. I mean, you mentioned the background actors, and it brings me to a question that I had, and it is around The Gaze, which was the sort of 50-minute film that you dropped in complement to the Underground Railroad. You very very clearly said, no, this is separate. This is something different. Obviously, the root of all storytelling is this sort of desire to be seen, this desire to bear witness, to really, yeah, put yourself in someone's place. But I think you as a filmmaker have been consistently able to sort of take that foundational concept to new heights and add depth and add layer, your visual language from the sort of like signature direct to camera, the POV that you use specifically in this series that is so gut wrenching. I will say, you know, especially in that first episode, and no spoilers, but I don't, you know, that moment was, yeah. But I want to talk about the gaze where you have all of these actors who aren't speaking, they're in full period garb, looking directly to the camera, and you called it a response to all the years of questions about the white gaze. As a viewer, it's poetic, it's sort of visceral, it's moving. But I want to know from the creator perspective, you know, as the sort of visionary, what is it about the sort of act of perception from both the character and the audience perspective, and also, you know, sometimes the avoidance of it, that continues to capture your attention in the way that it does? It's so at the forefront of your work.
And it's interesting because I try to avoid it. I try to avoid it. James can even tell you now it's this game of, you know, I'm always trying to talk myself out of doing those shots, especially as it works in the main narrative. You know, on this show, I think we only did it intentionally within the scenes for the first time that Ridgway and Cora meet. His little seance kind of session with her. And then when Royal and Cora first make love, I think those are the only 2 times we do it intentionally. Oh, and also when she cuts Mabel. But otherwise, I tried to avoid it because I don't want any aesthetic sort of device to become a crutch.
Right.
But this thing with the gays is interesting, and episode one is a difficult episode. And yet, when you watch the gays, I think the first 15 or 20 minutes of it are all portraits taken during the making of episode one. And I think part of that was, just to kind of summarize this whole conversation, I'm always trying to build a process where everybody feels involved. Everybody feels engaged. Everybody feels useful. If the director walks off the set, the scene will fall apart. Theoretically, we think that. Well, if the background walked off the set, the scene would also fall apart. And yet I am here on the call sheet and they are there. And so I think somehow just being on the set and just realizing how vital everyone was to the success of the episode, especially because people wouldn't leave the set, because the sets were just so well built. I mean, we built everything you see in episode one, aside from the main plantation house, everything else we built, Mark Freeberg, our production designer, from scratch. And it was so wonderful because here we are, I have these actors, portraying the enslaved. You would think that would be something that would be very degrading or derogatory to them as actors.
Mm-hmm.
And yet after our call cut, people would be hanging out. They'd be eating the food. We had Mashama Bailey from The Gray come out and make authentic Geechee cuisine. And I was like, yo, I need to, it filled me so much that I thought, oh, I need to capture this.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't an intellectual thing. It was just moving on instinct. And we did one, and then we did three, and then we did five, and then we just kept doing them. And mind you, every time we're doing one of these, it's a take of the actual show that we're not doing.
Mm.
So I think implicit in that is that this isn't just, I heard some people refer to it as outtakes or something like that. It's like, no, this is an actual thing. And it wasn't until I was done with it that I realized that the intellectual part of it started to come into being, which was even in the moment of me realizing I need to see them, somehow it was this offering of them seeing us. And then we started doing press, and this question of the white gaze kept coming up. And it was so cool. And notice I didn't even call it the black gaze, because that wasn't what it was about. It was just the damn gaze. It was just the gaze. Because I think in the act of creation, someone like myself, someone like Ava, someone like George, someone like Ryan, I don't think we think of that at all. We're not thinking of that. It's only in reflection of the work in addressing these questions that then this idea of the white gaze comes into play. Although I will say, people are very hesitant about these images, and it's their instinct to interrogate them because for so long they have been framed through the prism of the white gaze. And so, yeah, I'm glad it happened instinctually. And I'm also glad to talk about adaptation and the elasticity of the process. And oh my God, the privilege of being a filmmaker right now. Because yeah, we have this 10 episode thing that's going to launch on Amazon Prime. And then I have the freedom that, oh, and here's this 50-minute thing that I'm just going to put on my Vimeo channel, just like some kid, who's making skate videos, and the difference between me and her, there's no difference, we're kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's incredible. You were just leading me perfectly into my next questions, but you've had your roots in this sort of, you were that sort of kid who sort of like, filming whatever you could and kind of putting it out and making it happen, but you've continuously kept yourself working with it. That was like in an indie, but budget indie film that you sort of did yourself, or you eventually found funding for. I know you did like branded content for Facebook for a while. Like, you've just kept yourself sort of going and kept your sort of skills sharp. Are there other ways that you've sort of been able to do that, or is an advice that you can sort of impart to other filmmakers in that space to keep that muscle going?
Yeah. I think I just try to stay curious. I still program short films at the Telluride Film Festival. So I'm watching all these shorts every year, which is always some of the most interesting work I do, because this is work being made by kids, who have gone from skateboarding, at the park to now they go to film school, and now they want to make these short films that aesthetically, aren't driven by the commerciality of this, or the formative norms of that. And then I'm also just trying to, keep tabs on what's happening, in the world beyond film. The Underground Railroad looks the way it does, because of the last 4 years, me just sort of really trying to re-immerse myself in Black fine art, and I think some of the principles of Black fine art really has worked its way, into this show. The other works, especially Moonlight, is very influenced by the Asian New Wave. I think this one, it's just Kerry James Marshall, it's Deanna Lawson, just all these really, really dope people who are pushing Black imagery to this new place. And also, man, I'm still working with all my friends. I'm still, even when I was doing the branded content stuff, it was myself and these kids I had gone to film school with. We just had to find a way to eat. And we were living in San Francisco. So, yeah, Mark Zuckerberg was presenting Facebook pages at some Facebook conference. We had made the little 40-second video that played behind him, which was interesting because I thought that was my plan B, but then plan B becomes the plan. And that was when we decided we had to go and make Moonlight.
It's amazing. Amazing. And this will be my last question. It's a bit of a biggie. What is a film that you think every aspiring filmmaker should see and why?
Oh, that is a biggie. Oof.
I warned you.
I mean, I don't know. It's hard to there shouldn't be one film. There shouldn't be one film. There shouldn't be one film. I think fine folks. I'm gonna skirt your question and give a random answer. I think find folks who either their work or their taste you appreciate. Ask them, what's a film I should watch? Because if someone asked me that question, I would say, oh, Claire Denis, Beau Travail. But I'm not going to see that. I'm not going to say that's one film everybody should watch. But if you ask me right now, what's a film you think I should watch? I'll say Beau Travail. But hopefully that same person will then ask you what you think they should watch. Hopefully it'll be totally different. And that's how you build a palette. That's how you build a mood board, that isn't just siloed in this one experience or this one aesthetic. That's kind of how I stumbled onto Claire and people like Wong Kar-wai and Lynn Ramsey. It was completely by random. I wish we still had video stores, man. I went to Blockbuster and just started grabbing shit, and that was how it worked for me. Now I guess you get on the Criterion channel and you just...
Criterion channel. Sometimes I know Netflix has those code numbers that you can kind of type in and it brings you to a genre and you can kind of just explore from there. But
Brianna, it's not the same. I don't know how.
No, I went to Blockbuster too.
I think I'm a generation or two ahead of you, but man, those are...
I went to Blockbuster. I had Blockbuster. No, but it's definitely, it's not the same. I mean, it's not, there's a tactile sort of tangible thing about going into a place and perusing. I mean, that's why I love bookstores still, but Barry, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I cannot wait to see what you do next.
Hopefully it'll be a very long time from now because I am beat. This one took a pound of flesh, but I'm good though, I'm good.
Thank you so much.